In order to investigate the death of her acquaintance's son, a woman willingly admits herself to a psychiatric hospital by pretending that she suffers from paranoia. However, she begins to question her sanity as the director insists that she's actually meant to be confined and her ongoing investigation is just a delusion. In 1978 Spain, Dr. Raimundo Garcia del Olmo drops off Alice Gould, a private investigator, at a psychiatric hospital. He volunteers to accompany her inside, but the woman declines for she fears someone might recognize him. Dr. del Olmo expresses his admiration for her, especially since she's made the bravest choice of admitting herself to the hospital. Later on, Nurse Teron hands Alice's documents to Dr. Teodoro Rui Perez, particularly a letter addressed to the hospital's director, Dr. Samuel Alvar. Believing that Alvar won't mind him reading the letter, Rui Perez opens it and learns that Dr. Donadio recommended Alice's admission at their hospital. At the end of his letter, Donadio warns them that Alice possesses excellent intelligence and that she can manipulate even inexperienced psychiatrists. Rui Perez is unaffected by Donadio's warning because he's confident in his abilities. During Alice's psychiatric evaluation, Rui Perez learns that the woman has a degree in chemical science and is currently a private investigator. Confused, Rui Perez wonders why she's in their hospital. So Alice tells him that she's been legally abducted by her husband, Eliodoro. Rui Perez refuses to believe him since her records indicate that she tried to kill Eliodoro with the rice by poisoning him. With this information, Rui Perez believes that her threatening actions are the reason for her admission, but Alice denies it. Curious, Rui Perez asks if she prepared the poison, but Alice rejects such an idea, stressing that she doesn't know how. The psychiatrist finds it strange because Alice informed him earlier that she has a chemistry degree. Despite the loopholes in her statement, Alice is determined to prove her innocence by clarifying that concocting poison isn't her specialty. Moreover, she assures him that she never planned on killing her husband but reveals that Eliodoro was the one who tried to poison her. Rui Perez is surprised by her words, so he asks her what's Eliodoro's motive for trying to kill her. Alice explains that Eliodoro wants to become the sole trustee of her fortune, which will benefit his gambling addiction. After her evaluation, Dr. Castell accompanies Alice into a booth wherein she urges her to surrender her prized possessions. Alice feels hesitant to surrender all of her belongings, so she pleads with Castell to allow her to take one of her books inside. Due to empathy, Castell accommodates Alice's request, and the woman chooses to keep the book about paranoia. For the last test, Alice undergoes a security inspection to check if she's carrying any contraband. Alice feels humiliated by the procedure because she is required to be bare. Castell, who's monitoring the whole scenario, becomes teary-eyed as she pities the woman. That night, in Alice's cell, the woman retrieves the hidden newspaper articles about Damián's case concealed in the book's pages. Now that she's inside the facility, she's even more determined to solve Damián's case. The following day in the cafeteria, Ignacio, one of the patients, acquaints himself with Alice, and he proudly declares he's the only one who has self-awareness of his condition. In the middle of their conversation, Alice suddenly bolts upright as Luis Ojeda, a person with dwarfism, touches her inappropriately underneath the table. Angered by Luis's malicious actions, Ignacio chases him to avenge Alice, but the man sticks to Elephant Man's side, his protector. Though the man's stature threatens Ignacio, he still reprimands Luis, but the little person brushes his words off. Smugly, Ignacio returns to their table and assures Alice that he's sorted the issue. Afterward, the pair heads outside to smoke a cigarette when Alice becomes interested in a group of patients lounging in the garden. Ignacio introduces them to her, starting with the twins named Romulus and Remus. Since Alice can't distinguish them, Ignacio tells her that Romulus likes to imitate everyone, whereas Remus is non-verbal. Alice notices Nina near Romulus, so she asks about her identity, but Ignacio only knows that Romulus has treated her like she's their biological sister. One day, Alice goes to the bathroom and clogs the toilet using her socks. When it starts to flood, Alice heads to the archive room and reports the situation to Teron. The nurse is grateful for her initiative, and he begins to look into the problem. During Teron's absence, Alice enters the archive room and heads to the file cabinet to search for documents that may help her in her mission. There, Alice feels closer to solving Damián's case, for she's discovered a discharge document. In her room, Alice is surprised to learn that patients Luis and Ignacio were allowed to leave on the day of Damián's death. The following day, Alice confronts Ignacio about his supposed departure in November, so the man reveals that he's allowed to leave whenever his sister visits. Though he's given her an answer answer, Ignacio's confused as to why she knows such confidential information, but Alice ignores his question. Instead, she shows him the note that denies killing Damián, and she wonders if he sent it. When Ignacio denies knowledge of it, Alice asks if he knows Del Olmo, but he remains silent. Ignacio becomes distracted as an upcoming storm starts to brew. Afraid of it, Ignacio tries to leave, but Alice, who's determined to squeeze information from him, presses for more. Alice points out that the writing in the note indicates the author has schizophrenia, so she's curious if he's involved. Again, Ignacio refuses to answer as he wants to take shelter right away. Because Alice continues to prevent him from leaving, the rain touches Ignacio, causing him to experience seizures as he's hydrophobic. Once Ignacio's treated, the man informs Alice about his condition, but he's still curious about what she suffers from. Alice clarifies that she's normal and she's merely pretending to have a mental disorder as part of her investigation. Thinking she's joking, Ignacio laughs, but an offended Alice insists she's investigating Damián's case. To give her an idea of who might be the culprit, Ignacio informs her that Damián often engages in a physical altercation with Luis. With a new lead in her case, Alice is searching for Luis in the woods when Romulus taps her from behind. Taken aback, Alice tries to strike him out of self-defense, but she lowers her guard when she realizes who he is. After saying her apologies, Alice asks Romulus if he knows Luis's whereabouts, but the man doesn't provide her an answer. Instead, Romulus, with hope in his eyes, says that he knows her, confusing Alice. Still, she wants to know what he means, so she follows him when he invites her to accompany him to a place he calls home. As they arrive at their destination, Alice is impressed at a makeshift house hidden in the forest. Straight away, the woman enters the house and asks Romulus if he built it. The man happily confirms and tells her that she made it for Nina and Remus. While at it, he adds that he also dedicates it to her because he believes she's their mother. Wanting maternal attention, Romulus hugs Alice, and the woman returns the gesture as his actions make her emotional. Suddenly, the pair hears rustling nearby, alarming them. Due to this, Alice volunteers to check on it and orders Romulus to stay in their house. On the trail, Luis jumps into Alice, subduing the woman. Luis uses this opportunity to try to take advantage of her, but Alice attempts to struggle from his grasp. Without hesitation, Luis strikes her head repeatedly, knocking her unconscious. Shortly after, Alice awakens, but she becomes alarmed when she discovers she's strapped to the bed. Dr. Aureliano urges her to calm down, as he's afraid she might hurt herself. Alice demands the reason for her current situation, so Aureliano regretfully informs her that she's Luis's presumed killer. Contrary to this, Alice doesn't have any recollection of the incident and denies killing him. At that moment, Dr. Alvar appears, who's just returned from his vacation, and he expresses his need to converse with Alice. Alice is pleased to speak with him, thinking that she's finally met someone who'll support her claims of investigating Damián's case. During their conversation, Alice asks if there's missing information in the patient files. Alvar urges her to elaborate, so Alice discloses that she has accessed some files related to Damián and believes Luis is incapable of masking his crime into self-harm. However, Alvar's confused about what she's shared, and he denies any knowledge or association with her. The next day, Alice attends a meeting with the medical board to explain why she's in the hospital. Alvar reminds her that her doctor, Donario, and her husband both approved of her hospitalization, but Alice begs to disagree. According to her, Eliodoro is clueless about her confinement as she lied to him that she was going to Buenos Aires to investigate a false will. Rui Perez rejects her claims, reminding her that on her evaluation, she told him that Eliodoro tried to poison her. Unfazed, Alice tells him that she misled him and that she fabricated most of her answers. Upon Rui Perez's request to elaborate, Alice reveals that she faked the contempt she feels toward Eliodoro to be admitted to the hospital. However, Alice clarifies that she never lied about being a private investigator, but the psychiatrists are still unconvinced. This time, Castell urges her to elaborate on her alleged investigation, but Alice refuses and encourages Alvar to take the honor. Once more, Alvar denies any knowledge or association with her. For him, Damián's death is caused by self-harm, but Alice informs him that Del Olmo never believed it. Sometime in the past, Alice first met Del Olmo during a New Year's Eve party after Eliodoro introduced them to each other. She had prior knowledge about the doctor since she saw the newspaper coverage of their family's tragedy. Following their first encounter, Del Olmo contacted her and handed her the note. Del Olmo thought that someone wanted to hurt him by taking his son's life. Since the police refused to believe believe him, he requested Alice's help to investigate Damián's case. In the next few days, Alice studied the case thoroughly and learned that the sender of the letter had permission to leave. This made her decide to become an insider to access the patient's records. One day, Del Olmo handed Alice information about Alvar, orienting her that he'd agreed to be part of the investigation. According to Alice, Alvar helped him to get inside the facility by encouraging her to adopt a mental disorder, paranoia. Then, she crafted a recommendation letter under Donadio's name wherein she emphasized that she could manipulate inexperienced psychiatrists with her intelligence. Afterward, she tricked Eliodoro into signing the voluntary commitment form by pretending he needed to sign some bank documents. Upon hearing her account, Alvar doubts her, so Alice confidently informs him that she still has their correspondence in her office, but the man denies its existence. Later in the morgue, Alvar declares Alice as Luis's killer and cautions his colleagues that the woman is a threat to their patients. Thus, he recommends that she must be treated accordingly. Contrary to this, Aureliano and Castel believe that Alice is innocent. Moreover, they also think that her testament earlier is true, which upsets Alvar. To gain his associate's trust, Alvar presents his version of why Alice was admitted to their facility. Back then, Alice couldn't accept that Eliodoro was only after her money, so she encouraged him to drink his favorite liquor, unaware that it was spiked. Hours later, he experienced an excruciating pain in his chest, causing him to lose consciousness. A few months later, Eliodoro experiences the same symptoms after he ate his meal with Alice. Suffering in pain, Eliodoro called Alice for help, but his wife was preoccupied with celebrating his impending demise. Helpless, Eliodoro crawled into their room to try calling for help, but he eventually passed out. Shortly after, Dr. Donadio discovered that Eliodoro was poisoned, and the man suspected Alice. The next day, Eliodoro checked their kitchen cabinet and found a hidden compartment that concealed the poison, making him feel betrayed. As a way to confirm his suspicion, Eliodoro offered Alice a drink, and the woman consumed it instantly. That night, the poison took effect, and Alice experienced the same symptoms Eliodoro endured. The following morning, Alice snuck into the living room and observed that Eliodoro informed Donadio about the poison. Realizing she was caught, Alice created a different reality in her head because her consciousness couldn't bear to be punished. After Alvar shares his version, Castel still wants to find stronger evidence about his accusation against Alice. In support of her, Aureliano suggests they contact Eliodoro, Del Olmo, and Donadio to confirm the information they've shared. Later that day, Alvar introduces a man to Alice and asks if she recognizes him. Though confused as to why, Alice expresses that she's never met him. Suddenly, the man speaks by introducing himself as the real Dr. Del Olmo, rendering Alice speechless. Regardless, Alice denies his identity as she believes he isn't the Del Olmo she knows. Unfortunately, the psychiatrists in the room witness how she displays an unstable state of mind, so Alvar alerts the nurses to seize Alice. Following this, the nurses take Alice inside the treatment room, wherein she undergoes electroshock therapy. While she's unconscious, Alice begins to create a different narrative wherein she thinks that Eliodoro hired a man to pretend he's Del Olmo and make her appear mentally unstable. Through this, Alice suspects Eliodoro will access her money while she's away. Upon awakening, Alice sees Aureliano checking on her, so she informs him that Eliodoro has arranged a scam. Shortly after, Castel accompanies Aureliano to meet Alice, and the pair learn that no one killed Damián, but Eliodoro must have promised Donadio money to conspire with him. Surprisingly, Castel tells them that Donadio hasn't replied to them. Now, Alice's hunch becomes more apparent that she was framed to investigate a non-existent case to make her appear more mentally unstable. Furthermore, Alice believes that Alvar is also involved in the scam, but Aureliano doubts it. However, Castel supports Alice since the director is obsessed with ruling out her version of the story. Aureliano asks for possible proof from Alice, and the woman tells him that if her bank account is wiped, it would explain Eliodoro's disappearance. Convinced, Aureliano heads to the police station to report that Alice is legally abducted. Meanwhile, Castel sneaks inside Alvar's office and searches for Alice's file. As she locates it, Castel discovers that it contains a check from Eliodoro that's worth 2 million pesetas. At that moment, Alvar appears and questions her snooping, but Castel proceeds to interrogate him about the money. Alvar reasons that the money is for the hospital, but Castel thinks no one pays such an amount without wanting something in exchange. She confronts him about what he's promised Eliodoro, but Alvar denies any association with him. Moments later, Nurse Pero asks the patients if they've seen Alice, but none of them cooperate with her. Without a choice, Pero orders her colleagues to search for Alice in the room thoroughly, and she approaches Ignacio to inquire anywhere about the woman's location. Ignacio provides no leads either, so Pero simply leaves while she suppresses her anger. Unbeknownst to her, Alice is hiding underneath a patient's skirt, and she expresses her gratitude to the woman. Then, Alice announces to the patients that she needs to leave the facility, but she pleads that they help her. Initially, Ignacio's hesitant, afraid that it'll be impossible, but Alice assures him she has a plan. That night, Aureliano calls Castel to inform her that he's currently at Alice's residence, and he believes that she's telling the truth because Eliodoro's missing. On the other hand, Ignacio watches as the warehouse is swallowed in fire, so he executes his part in the plan. Though he's scared of the water, Ignacio bravely faces the sink and drenches his arm with the water. Now that the blisters appear, Ignacio can't bear the pain, causing him to stumble. A nurse stationed to guard his cell appears to check on him, but with Ignacio's concerning state, he decides to call for a doctor. While he's away, Ignacio unlocks the patient's cell doors and alerts them of the fire. Because of this, all the patients cause chaos in the facility, but the noise disturbs Remus, so Romulus comforts him. Outside, Alice is pleased that the patients disperse in the open, allowing her to flee. Hurriedly, Alice heads to the laundry room, and she breaks the pane so she can unlock the door. Alice quickly dons a nurse's uniform, but she's surprised to see the Elephant Man looming behind her. Surprisingly, the man doesn't attack her, so Alice leaves the room to continue her escape. At the same time, Ignacio encounters Romulus inside his cell, and the man is shocked to see that he is severely injured. Ignacio approaches him, but his concern turns into grief when he realizes he's already dead. Shortly after, Alice reaches the security booth, grabs the keys, and heads to the gate, but she's surprised that a coroner arrives. The woman informs Alice that she's summoned to help investigate a patient's corpse, confusing her. Regardless, she welcomes the coroner into the facility, but she can't stop thinking about the dead patient. When Alice is about to escape, the coroner pleads for her help in reaching Romulus' cell. This revelation shocks Alice, especially since she's gotten closer to him, so she decides to return to the facility. However, Alice approaches the coroner and knocks her unconscious. Following this, Alice impersonates the coroner and investigates Romulus' body when Alvar barges into the examination room to apprehend her. Alice's disguise is exposed after Alvar and the authorities discover the coroner's unconscious body wearing a patient's uniform. Now, Alice pleads with them to listen to her as she knows who the culprit is. Based on her observation, Romulus has multiple glass wounds, and it appears that a considerable weight has crushed his body. Alice believes that the culprit is the Elephant Man, as he wants to avenge Luis's death. Back when Luis tried to take advantage of Alice, the Elephant Man harbored hatred toward Romulus when he killed the little person to defend Alice. Alongside this, Alice points out that the man feels jealous of Romulus since he's close to Nina, his unrequited love. To prove her claims, Alice encourages the authorities to check for glass cuts on the Elephant Man's hands. In compliance with this, Castel, alongside the other psychiatrists, visits the Elephant Man's cell and urges him to show his hands. Indeed, the man has deep glass cuts on his hands, which horrifies the psychiatrists. After the authorities arrest the Elephant Man, Inspector Ruiz de Pablos informs Alice and Alvar that Eliodoro has cleared her bank account because the woman was declared incapacitated. Detective Soto tells her they can't discharge her, but they will allow her to talk to the judge. Later on, Alice visits the surviving twin, and she expresses the fear she feels at the thought of losing him. However, she reveals that she knows he's Romulus because she believes a mother always recognizes her child, causing him to shed a tear. This time, Alice encourages him to recount what happened on the night of Remus' death. According to Romulus, Remus was overwhelmed by the noise, so he took him to his cell. Romulus left to fetch Nina, but he was unaware that the Elephant Man was heading to his cell to punish him. On the day of Alice's trial, Alvar relinquishes his vote, for he firmly knows that Alice is a manipulative and dangerous person. Yet he knows he can't change their minds, so he allows the board members to decide Alice's fate. Afterward, he hands his resignation letter and encourages them to choose a new director. When the voting proceeds, the majority of the board members vote that Alice must receive a declaration of her sanity, which pleases the woman. Before leaving, Alvar clears Donadio's name, emphasizing that they never conspired with him since their correspondence didn't reach him. He adds that he invited Donadio to clarify such a matter to the board, making Alice feel threatened. As Alvar leaves, Donadio enters the room, and he happens to be the man Alice mistook for Del Olmo. Donadio greets her, but he gently chastises her for making another mess. Upon hearing this, Alice becomes frozen in place and doubts her sanity.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.